you for joining us this evening. We have a fantastic panel. We are joined by a very special guest, Professor Robert Kerr. And of course, we have Paul Ellis, Odon
Hello.
Lafontaine, author of The Great Secret of Islam, JC, also an author and a well-known guest on the channel, and myself, Lloyd. And we had discussed amongst ourselves that we would talk about Jesus in the Quran, but it seems we may be discussing more diverse topics than that. Professor Kerr has some very interesting material he wants to discuss, and then we'll see where the conversation takes us. So thank you, gentlemen, for joining us. Professor Kerr, please introduce yourself, and we'd love to know more about the work that you've done and the work that you're planning to do, and your thoughts on the topics that we plan to discuss.
Well, okay, yes. So thank you for inviting me, and I hope I don't disappoint you or the viewers all too greatly. I shall do my utmost. But yes, I'm basically by academic training a Semiticist with Semitic languages. I did other things before bumping into Islam. I had tried to avoid Islam. Even when I did Arabic, I kept to Arabic literature and made a detour around Islam. And then I eventually ran into I was interested in Roman border defenses in late antiquity, and I ran into the Limes Arabicus, the Roman border defense. And then I realized that all of this stuff with the Quran coming from Mecca and Medina was absolutely impossible, and I wrote an article, and that seemed to be more popular than anything I wrote on Phoenicians in late antiquity or past participles in Punic and exciting stuff like that. And one thing led to another, and now I am the director of Inârah, which is at the University of Saarbrücken in Germany. And we lost Paul. There, Paul is back. And that's some of you might have heard of Inârah. We're a research institute on the origins of Islam and the Quran. We intend to apply historical critical philology to the study of Islam and the Quran, as it is the only way to analyze texts. So it's well known for biblical studies, but also for classical studies, Homer especially. And it's the only way to analyze texts. There's some people that object. They say you can only analyze Western texts this way, but nobody seems to mind when you apply this method to the Hebrew Bible, which is certainly not a Western text. So I've never heard a good reason why you shouldn't apply it to the Quran. It was established about nearly 20 years ago, I suppose 18 years ago. It's a group of, that time in Saarbrücken, we had a critical mass of people interested in the same subject. And it was founded by my predecessor, Professor Ohlich, who was a historian of early Christianity. So he was a Catholic theologian, but he had difficulties, how should we say, with the divinity of Christ and with the Trinity. He had serious objections to both. And he started researching what he would have called the invention or the development of the Trinity, and then he bumped into Islam, and there were other people there working on the Sana manuscripts, and Luxembourg was still there then, and with his Syro-Aramaic approach, his book, which appeared nearly more than a quarter century ago. And what we then have seen is this has turned Quranic studies into something scientific. So we have this problem that nowadays we do Islamic studies, and they say, yeah, you can't, in French, you would say you can't essentialize Islam. I'm not sure what you say in English, but essentialiser, Odon, I don't know how you translate that, but you can't define Islam. I think that is to a certain extent, it may be justified, but I think that when you often hear about Orthodox Islam, well, Islam can't be an orthodoxy because it doesn't have a dogma. It's more an orthopraxy than an orthodoxy.
Well, on this point, I mean, Muslims are expected to believe the Quran and not question it. So in some sense, they obviously want to impose their own paradigm on the rest of the world. But then also, Islam also defines itself. If you go into the two oldest Islamic dictionaries, like the Al-Qamus al-Nahit and the Lisan al-Arab, they define Islam, and it's a deen. And a deen has very specific criteria. And effectively,
a deen, I think this is part of where you raise an excellent point. This is where a great part of the misunderstanding arrives, is because deen is usually translated in English, I guess, as religion, which
it's not. It's a political system. It's a political legal system.
Well, in German, you would say a Daseinsordnung, an order of existence, because let's say if you take, for example, the Sharia, which is based on the Islamic traditions, largely the Sunnah, let us say, sort of a de facto canonization of the Sunnah, but as the concretization of the will of Allah. So you see several interesting things here. So first of all, I would say Islam is a religion of doing. So it's the 5 pillars, and it's not a religion of believing. It's not a fides in the Christian sense. And this is the problem that too many people have. Even people who are not Christian, they look at other religions, especially Islam, through Christian glasses. And this leads to skewed results. So when you look, for example, as the Sharia as the concretization of Allah's will, you see several things. That first of all, if Adam was already a Muslim and this is universal, it applies universally. You can say Judaism is a nomocracy, so you're Jewish by obeying the Mosaic laws, but they only apply to you if you're Jewish and not to the rest of the world. And the Jews never had any plans to conquer the world, contrary to what some people might claim without any basis.
Right.
But, they keep to themselves and mind their, and if you're Jewish, you stick to those laws. But Islam is universal. So it applies to all places and all times, since even before time, because according to the Islamic exegesis of the Quran, that all of the souls have professed loyalty to Allah before their temporality, before they were put into bodies, and so you actually only have Muslims and apostates. But the point being that this has several results. So to paraphrase Nietzsche, it is a bit beyond good and evil, because nobody would say that the Sharia is good or bad. It's just the will of Allah, which has to be carried out because it's the will of Allah. But this, you see, you don't have a distinction between what you have in Western tradition, in Judaism, Christianity, but even in the Greek and Roman legal systems, this idea of natural law. So you cannot, in Islam, distinguish between good and bad on your own. You need the Sharia. So this is a whole different thing. And then if you look at the Sharia, contrary to what most people tend to think, at least in my experience, is it's not a canon. Usually when people come up and they show me I've got the Sharia, what they usually mean, it's the Constitution of the Islamic Republic of Iran. But it's not codified. It's an endless ocean. But if you look at it globally, what we would say criminal law or something is only about maybe 20% of it. Most of it is ritual law. So when prayers are valid, how to dress, how to get out of bed.
If I can perhaps add something here, my channel started specifically because I started reading every single Islamic Sharia manual that I could get my hands on. I have a collection of probably over 50 at this point, and I've read and I've covered them extensively. I have probably hundreds of hours of episodes on the channel just on the Sharia. Now, within Islam, you've got a corpus of law. This Sharia, it's a corpus of law which rivals Western law. And of course, they have courts, they have judges, they have qadis, and so on. And however, within Islam, you've got very specific rulings. For instance, if you look at, let's say there's a verse or two in the Quran that talks about chopping off of hands or whatever.
Exactly,
You go into one of the, let's say you go into one of the texts, and you'll have 50, 60 pages explicitly defining exactly when, where, why, how.
I know.
But within Islam, you also have various doctrines. Like you've got the doctrines of azimat and rukhsa, and this causes deep confusion because you've got those who are supposedly extremist and they're not. They're just following strictly. That's azimat. And then rukhsa are those who have been given dispensation. And in fact, they could literally circumvent, undermine, completely violate, contradict every ruling in Islam and still be a good Muslim because they are following the doctrines, because they are following additional doctrines like taysir and darura and other things, and practicing hiyal, which means they can deceive, they can do all sorts of things, which even though we would see this as deceit or, for instance, hypocrisy, no, they are being a good Muslim, they are doing this, and Allah still rewards them for doing this, even though it is eating pork or drinking wine or something for whatever reasons. So unfortunately, and then tomorrow they could flip and they could go to become azima again. So there's these doctrines which we don't understand, and there's this confusion about, well, extremists, non-extremists, which causes confusion, but it's just they're following the doctrines.
Oh, I concur entirely. I was sorry. I was trying to avoid going into too much depth right away. But no, I generally concur. But the point I just wish to make without going into the details, yes, certainly it is a bit the unjustified means if it's,
which is literally one of the laws in the Sharia.
Yeah,
one of the principles of the Sharia.
Yes, indeed. And if it promotes Islam, certainly. But the other point is what one has to see. So we don't have a distinction between natural and positive law, which is also a huge distinction. It should be, which is fundamental, I believe.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, in fact, since you mentioned here, if you look at the pillars of the Sharia, you've got al-maqasid al-qadr wa asal, whatever. The aims are more important than the means. That is literally one of the pillars. Yeah. And al-darurat tubikh al-masurat, however you pronounce that, necessities permit the forbidden, and this is within the writing of Shar'ani in the Mizan al-Kubra, and this is very much part and parcel of the Sharia, and which is frightening. I mean, yeah.
Well, I concur. My point was, without going into too much depth, was merely to point out that the legal system is entirely incompatible with with our legal system or with a democracy because of everything laid down in the Sharia.
Just a little remark. You're telling Robert how incompatible it is with our Western views. Our views are based on Christianity, and Christianity is the total opposite of the principle you just put forth,
yes.
Lloyd. In Christianity, the means are more important than the aim. Yes. We cannot do evil in the name of a greater good. It is not Christian at all. And even in a post-Christian society, these Christian principles have remained. It shows us how compatible.
Until Macron became president.
Sorry, Robert, didn't hear you.
Until Macron became president, you mean?
Yeah, for example.
Yeah, or Trudeau. It is.
Indeed.
But but you're basically correct. So basically, let's to keep it simple. The an Islamic democracy would be what has happened in the past in, for example, Saudi Arabia or what have you, is that you want to introduce a law regarding seatbelts, and then they asked the ulama to find a justification, and there's a hadith somewhere that says that if you go on a camel trip, you should make sure you're well girded in, so you don't, if you fall asleep, you don't fall off or something. And this was taken to mean that even the Prophet foresaw the wearing of seatbelts. So it was then put up to the vote, and of course it was 100% for, because who's going to vote against a divine revelation, let us say? Or well, put it this way, just to keep it simple: if Christianity is seen as the imitation of Christ, then Islam is seen as the imitation of Muhammad. And without being a historical critical scholar, if you read the Sirat, both have to lead to entirely diametrically opposite results, I would say, without judging either. I suppose anybody could judge for themselves.
Right. You said the audience responded to your paper on Islam. Why do you think that was? What was the...
Which paper?
You mentioned you instead of writing about Punic grammar or something, you wrote something.
Oh no! I wrote an article a long time ago, but it was why, linguistically speaking, the Quran couldn't come from Mecca or Medina.
Right.
And it's basically the buckle up, indeed. But yeah. So I mean, this was foreseen before the beginning of time. You have to be thankful. Without Islam, we wouldn't have seatbelts.
Allah works in mysterious ways, as we say.
But being less serious, no, no. But going back, so the point is, if you look at the language of the Quran, and also the contents of the Quran, because how often is something, whatever it means, how often is an entity designated as Muhammad mentioned in the Quran?
4 times, maybe?
4 times. And who is the most mentioned figure in the Quran?
Jesus and Moses.
Exactly, Moses and then Jesus. And if you look at the Quran, it is largely a Christological work on defining Christology against the view of Chalcedon. And if you look at the debates, especially in the Eastern Church, Oriental Church,
an actuary actually broke this down. I know an actuary who did this, and he mentions he made this graph. Muhammad, Jesus, Moses, everyone else. So he says here 40% of the time.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. No, but what you also find in the Quran.
If we just add one little bit, I think Pharaoh gets an awful lot of mentions in the Quran, doesn't he?
Yeah.
I think 74
more than Muhammad.
It might be mentioned more than Jesus, isn't it? 74 references to Pharaoh.
Yes,
he's obviously a favorite character for the author.
Well, one thing is also that if you look at the names in Arabic, they are, so it's clear that they're not based on a Arabic tradition of these names.
Mm-hmm.
So the most of the biblical figures in the Quran are Arabic transcriptions of Syriac renderings of these names. For example, you see something like Ismail, which, in Hebrew, Ishmael is pretty transparent also under the circumstances of his birth as described in Genesis, God heard. But if you look at the Arabic writing of this, it's clearly a transcription.
I'm trying to make you the primary speaker, but I am not succeeding.
Oh, no. We can share the screen. We can share the screen. We can. I don't need to look at myself too closely.
I'll put you up top there.
but the point being that they're transcriptions, so it's not based on an Arabic tradition. It depends on the Syriac, the Peshitta, and as Luxemburg pointed out, that the reason why Abraham is now called Ibrahim in the Quran, he was of course originally Abraham, but they no longer understood the old Arabic orthography. And then you have funny things, for example, like Pharaoh, which is of course an Egyptian word. In the Hebrew Bible is transliterated pretty much correctly, not in Arabic. And you see, for example, in the Sirat al-Nabiya, the biographies of the prophets, you see this, for example, with Joseph. So it's not in the Quran, but in the Arabic tradition, where the guy that buys Joseph in Egypt is called, in the Quran, it's just Al-Aziz, but the mighty one. But in the Sirat of the prophets, he's called Kitfir, which is the same rasam as Potiphar, but they had no idea how to point the word. So Potiphar is an Egyptian name. Kitfir is just, do you have any idea what's there? Well, do something, put them, Arabic does offer a lot of possibilities on how to point letters. So it could be Potfir, it could be Potkir, or to take your pick. There's numerous possibilities. Then you have the large amount of that. All of the theological words in the Quran are from Aramaic. So this does say something, because if you look in European languages, Western European languages, the vocabulary of Christianity comes largely from Latin. That was the language of the missionaries. And in Slavic language, excepting Polish and some others, it's largely from Greek, which was the language of the missionaries. And you see this also in classical Ethiopic, is where the Christian vocabulary comes from Syriac. That was the language of the missionaries. And it's also in Arabic. So if you look at all of the words for the 5 pillars of Islam, they're all borrowed from Aramaic, just for an example. And so the question that I asked myself then, well, how do you, who in Mecca would have spoken Syriac, especially if you were an illiterate prophet? And then if you look at the script distribution, the fact that this Arabic is written in the letters, which is clearly derived from Aramaic, an Aramaic script. But if you look at the distribution of inscriptions, the Aramaic was largely used north of the Jordan, or to the other side of the Jordan, not towards this side of Israel and Syria and what have you. And only incidentally, at Ma'adin Saleh, which was a Nabatean entrepot, but not in Mecca and Medina. And there you used, so if you look what happened, you have the old South Arabic writing. I don't know if you have a picture of that, Lloyd, but...
Of which, sorry? The
Sabaic inscription, just type that in. You might find it. Just anything you can find.
I'm just finding it here. Just getting it up. And I think it's, here we go. For example, this is the earliest evidence, this article from 2022, the earliest evidence of Christianity in Arabia. And they mention, I believe this was this Sabaic script?
Well, let's say that on this inscription, if something was written in Mecca in the 7th century, it would have used a script not exactly like that, but similar to that. which is
I'll just
ultimately in the root. Pardon? Ah,
Here we go.
voila. C'est mieux. That's better. Yeah, so this script, what you're pointing to there, it's derived from the Canaanite alphabetic script, which was used in the Levant and in Syria, Ugarit, in a cuneiform version. And at some time in the Bronze Age, towards the end of the Bronze Age, this split off, and like that, that's monumental Sabaic, which is also related to the Ethiopic script still in use in Eritrea and Ethiopia today. And this originally comes from the Levant, but went to Yemen and had a life of its own. And you see that Arabia up to the Jordan was largely under the influence of Sabaic culture, voila, like that. And so if the Quran had come from Mecca or Medina in the 7th century, it would have been written in a script similar to that or based on that. And the interesting thing is you wouldn't have needed diacritics because this script can render all of the phonemes of Arab with distinct letters. So if you look largely, the problem that one had by adapting an Aramaic script to Arabic, you see this with the Ain and the Rain. Aramaic had lost the Rain, a long time ago, hundreds of years before. So they took the sound that was most similar and they put a dot on it on top, and then you get to Arain. And but if you look, for example, at the Kirat in the Quran, so this proves the oral tradition of transmitting the Quran. Tabari gives a funny story about this, but if you look at the distinctions, even if the Ra and the Za, the Zain, the Z, and the Ra, the R, well, you can't invent a sound change that has where Z becomes R. So it's either one or the other. So they couldn't always distinguish it. Potiphar Kitfir is a good example. So the Fa has one dot on it, and the Qa is the same sign with two dots on it. So say Kitfir or Potiphar. So the script definitely points to northern Syria. And for example, if you look at Greek epigraphy, so when they wrote names, because Greek was a common language in the Near East until Islam, Syria, Lebanon, even Jordan, the Christians, the Chalcedonian Christians anyway, spoke Greek often. The further you went into the desert, the less Hellenistic they became. But the point being that if you look at the names in Greek where it's vocalized handily, when you see Semitic names, it's hard to determine to which language they belong, but the diagnostic indicator, the easiest diagnostic indicator of Arabic is the definite article al. And in northern Syria, you find the greatest concentration of names with al. And what's interesting is that you have this phenomenon in Arabic pronunciation called imala, which is where the the short a, can become pronounced like an e, so el. And you often find this rendered in Greek inscriptions with an eta, with an e, so el. But according to Islamic tradition, this imala was a feature of the dialect of Mecca, which is of course nonsense.
Right.
So my argument was basically that the script, the language, and the contents point to northeastern Syria, which was, if you look in classical antiquity, that was Arabia, later Arabia Petraea and the Roman provinces there. But
Greater Palestine.
Pardon?
I think it was also like Greater Palestine, which they
No,
call it Syria.
This Palestine was only much later.
Okay, with the
That was
Romans.
after the Second Jewish Revolt.
Lloyd,
Syria,
let me just jump in. Lloyd, I've sent you the link in the chat, in our private chat. For Robert's article, there is a map here that you can show our audience.
Thank you, Odon.
Here we go.
Voila.
I'll drop the link in the chat as well.
Yeah. There's the article there. It's the brief version of the article. So what you see in Arabia Petraea, but especially towards Aleppo in the north. So if you look, for example, at classical geographers like Strabo and from the Roman period, Strabon, Strabo, I think in English, and Pliny, the natural history, they all talk about Arabia being in the north. And when you look at Urfa, we've found Aramaic inscriptions that say Malkat de Arab or Sultan de Arab, so the king of Arabia, of the Arabs maybe. And from Dura Europos, we've got a Greek inscriptions that mentions the Arche Arabes, so the head of the Arabs. So that's all in the north. So when you look at the map, Arabia Deserta in Latin, it means empty Arabia, deserted Arabia, maybe in English, means there isn't anything there. And then this part, the map isn't too exact, but I didn't draw it. It was drawn, but what's Arabia Felix is Yemen, what is meant. Mm-hmm. And the point being there is, Yemen was much like in history, was like it is nowadays. It was never very Felix, but the point being, it's a translation mistake, because Yaman, it means right, to the right, which, so if you look, when we navigated before they discovered the North Star, you orientated, so you look to the east, ex oriente lux, where the sun rose. So then your right is to the south, and you also have this in Hebrew and what have you, that your right is the south, but right is always good, because, if something is sinister, well, sinistra in Latin, Italian is to the left, and right is good and left is bad. I mean, we don't need to get into a political discussion, but you get what I mean.
Yeah.
So that's a translation mistake of the Romans. What Yaman means is to the south, the southern Arabia. But the point here, what one has to remember, is that what is Yemen was an exceedingly cultured area. The long history also with Christianity, but the point was, Christianity didn't arrive through Arabia Deserta. It arrived by the sea route, either by the Red Sea on the left or through the Persian Gulf on the right. And this is, part of the problem with Yemen nowadays. It is the difference, certain tribes have become Shiite and others have become Sunni. And Shiism arrived through the Persian Gulf, and Sunniism arrived through the Red Sea. It didn't arrive through the land route, because also, this is a problem with the Islamic narrative, is that by the 7th century, the trade was largely by sea, because the Romans had figured out how the monsoon winds.
Well, you had Paul, who was pursued, I believe, by the king of Petra because he spent time in Petra and he was preaching without a license, and they pursued him to kill him. And then, of course,
but after Paul's conversion, the proof of this is that if you read in the book of Acts, after Paul's conversion, he goes into Arabia.
Yeah, And then you have the also
But,
within
but
the,
where he's going into, that was Arabia is near Damascus, because he goes into the desert. So 1 second, let me look it
you
up.
have the Ethiopians as well, the Aksumites, who very early convert to Christianity.
Yes, but that was through Egypt and by the sea route.
All right. Okay.
1 second, let me just look it up here. Let me find the Bible.
Are you familiar with this work by Jeffrey, by the way?
Pardon?
Are you familiar with this work by Arthur Jeffrey? This is foreign. This dates from 1938. It needs a slight update. I've done a little bit of work on this, but this is the foreign version.
I've written a long article trying to update to some extent. Odon has it.
No, Aramaisms in the Quran.
Yeah.
Aramaisms in the Quran. Yeah.
So according to Jeffrey, there's something like 55 languages represented in the Quran, which is very unexpected. Of course, you've got Syriac, Aramaic, you've got Hebrew, Greek, Ethiopic, coupled with Amharic. So you have a significant, and of course, Pahlavi Persian. So you've got these languages.
Yeah, so the point here is, I think one has to, with all due respect, sir, analyze what Jeffrey is saying a bit more correctly, because, for example, the Akkadian, so in the time of the Quran, there is no Akkadian spoken anymore. So if Akkadian, ultimately Akkadian words entered Arabic, they came through Aramaic. And the same applies to, go down on your list a little bit, please. Amharic. So Amharic didn't exist. And with Egyptian, you have Egyptian and you have Coptic. Well, Egyptian wasn't spoken in the 7th century, so if anything, and of course, Coptic is nothing else but Egyptian, just written with Greek letters. So you have to be a bit more careful with this.
No, I just took what he said. I just took what he had in his book, and I just made this table out of it, this Excel sheet. So
yeah, but what I mean is there are but the point is you have to distinguish between the origins of a word.
Right.
So, for example, if you take something just falls into my mind. So if you look at our word sesame, you have it also in Akkadian, shimshamu. And it's not an Akkadian word, it comes from somewhere else. It's a term that wandered with the product. So you could say that probably sesame comes to us from Akkadian, but it's not directly an Akkadian loanword because it went to Aramaic and then to Greek and to Latin, and then it eventually came to English. So you have to distinguish between the origins of the word and how it got into Arabic.
Right.
May I ask a question about this topic? So, am I right in thinking? Sorry, go on.
But this does show us it's not a pure Arabic Quran because the language.
Certainly, I concur. The basic tenet. So Jeffrey's work is brilliant, and it needs an update, and I tried to update it somewhat. And Odon is blackmailing me to write a new version of that, which I am in the process of doing. But it takes time, among other things. But it's something I intend to. I hope to do.
Sounds good. So this is all very interesting.
It needs a update, but so the point you raise is valid. And sorry, JC, I'll shut up in a second. But the point being that if the Quran came from Mecca, besides, so as I said, the language of the Quran points to northern Syria. The script of the Quran points to the same place. The contents of the Quran, so if you look at the Christological controversies at Tur Abdin and other places among Arabic theologians, They're all in northeastern Syria in the centuries between Chalcedon and supposedly the appearance of the Quran. They're debating this, and there's just a point that has to be remembered. When you say Nabatean and Aramaic and all of these people, one must remember we're not talking about Aramaeans here as an ethnicity. This can be confusing. So Aramaeans, they did exist, and they were largely deported like the 10 tribes of Israel into Mesopotamia. And at a certain stage around the 8th century, 7th century BC, Aramaic became the administrative language of the Assyrian Empire because cuneiform was too difficult. And in the 7th century, you see this in the library of Assurbanipal. So he collects this huge library of cuneiform texts, Gilgamesh, and all of the famous myths and eposes, and but on the back, on the spine of the tablet, the title is written in Aramaic. And you see this in the 8th century, when the Assyrians do a conquest. I think it's Salmanaser V is the first time it appears. There's a famous stela in the Louvre where, so usually, the Assyrian soldiers pass by with all the heads they've cut off, and and there's a scribe there telling up how many heads have been cut off because you're Assyrian and that's what you do. And by the time of Salmanaser V, if I remember correctly, you see 2 scribes there, and they're both seated differently, and one has a scroll, and he's clearly writing it in Aramaic. So you see that Aramaic becomes the administrative language of first the Neo-Assyrian Empire, then the short-lived Neo-Babylonian Empire, and then in the Achaemenid, the first Persian Empire. And what one has to remember, like with the Achaemenids, this is the royal householder Achaemenids. It's not a huge movement of population. It's sort of under new management, let us say. The top changes. But they administer, and then after that with, sorry, yes. After that, then you get these Middle Aramaic dialects, and what one has to see in the Syro-Levant, what's now Syria, Lebanon, Mesopotamia, Iraq, Jordan, what have you. The Aramaic was the written language. It's a bit like in Europe during the Middle Ages, everybody wrote in Latin, but nobody had Latin as a mother tongue.
Mm.
It was largely the written language until the Reformation. And then, people like Luther decided, for some reason, we shouldn't have Latin anymore. And we have to write the vulgar languages. But anyway, and now we're stuck where we are today. But the point being, that Aramaic was basically the international language before Greek. It was a world language. We find Aramaic inscriptions in Georgia, in Afghanistan, and one of the first references to Buddhism from a King Ashoka in Afghanistan. He writes them in Indian language and in Aramaic and Greek. So his mother is probably Greek. But Aramaic he writes because it's the international language. And you see this, for example, with the Nestorians after they were condemned for heresy. They cross the Euphrates and they have a great career in Persia, in the Sassanid Empire. And they basically go all the way to China. And that Odon knows more about that than I do. But so Aramaic was the international language, but in the Middle East, it was the liturgical language of the church. But the people who, let's say in Syria and Jordan, Lebanon, who used Aramaic were ethnically Arabs. That should be remembered.
Mm-hmm.
Mm.
So when we talk about Nabateans, these are Arabs, but they write in Aramaic. And what you see sometimes in Nabatean inscriptions when you read them, so the names are Arabic, and there's a lot of Arabic loan words in there. And sometimes, you know, there was a while ago, but I was reading a tomb inscription, and a guy makes a tomb, and he says it's for his second wife and the children he's had with his second wife. And he sort of doesn't want his first wife, he's really upset with her, to have anything to do with the tomb, nor the children he had with the first woman. And he basically disinherits them. And there, the inscription, you know, there you get into Arabic law. So he doesn't know the Arabic words for this. And then all of a sudden you find the last phrases of the inscription are clearly in Arabic, thinly disguised as Aramaic. And sometimes it's all over the map. So you have some inscriptions that start in Greek, and then the guy says, oh, shit, is this a aorist or is this a medium passive? No idea. Let's just switch to Arabic. And they write the rest of the inscription in Safa'itic or something. So it's a linguistic milieu there, but the important thing to remember is Aramaic is not an ethnicity. The Arabs are there. And the other thing is, if you look at the Arabic conquest of the 7th century, you know, even if you accept the historicity of Mecca and Medina, for which there is no evidence, but yeah, we can discuss Safa and Marwa and Bakka if you want.
Yeah. Shall we give JC a chance to make his comment?
Yeah, it was a question. If I may,
Yes,
a question
sure.
about what we have seen on that spreadsheet a moment ago, which is, I assume I could be wrong about this. In order to assess if a word is from a particular language, that work would be done post diacritics. But if we were to look at the Rassam only, some of them, they may have been different languages. Would that actually be correct? That some words now, maybe they are Arabic, but in the original form, the diacritics were in a different place, and it would have been basically borrowed from a different language, and we don't have a way of knowing?
Oh, in some cases, there are words in Arabic that, you know, we don't really, in the Quran, which we don't really know what they mean, and you can point them differently, and depending how you point them, because it's clear that, so even if, as I said, you look at the Qira'at, you know, the Qira'at basically implies that there's several hundred canonical readings of the Quran, and you know, because all of the canonical readers have students who have students and what have you.
Yeah, we had Hudson
So there's no
yesterday. She's got 37 in her possession, 37 different versions of the Quran.
Yeah, so you shouldn't exaggerate too much, because, you know, if you look at a critical edition of the New Testament and the textual variants, you know, there are variants, but
we're not speaking about differences, because I mean, anything written not from a printing press or photocopied will be different, but there are clear examples of he did this, she did this, this was done to them, they did this to other people, you know, which are clearly not the same thing.
Oh, I concur. And you know, you have this, for example, in Surah Tawbah, Surah 9, where you know, without going into Arabic, but you have where those who die on the path of Allah, but you also have a Qira'at from Qatallah, where you just vocalize it differently, and then it says those that exert themselves Qutila on the path of Allah. So do you need to die, or you just need to go out to fight?
Yeah.
So there are yeah, so JC, you could, if you wanted to, you know, probably develop an algorithm to, you know, calculate to present all of the possibilities. If you just take the Rassam and all the possibilities of pointing and all the possibilities of vocalizing. So, because it's clear that the early Qurans were not neither vocalized nor pointed. So there must have been a reading tradition, but it didn't last long. Otherwise, you wouldn't have the qira'at. And secondly, so what Tabari has this really humorous story where he says the first written Qurans were pointed and vocalized and what have you. And then they got rid of it so that everybody could read the Quran in their own dialect. Which, so obviously Tabari is aware that the old Qurans don't have pointing and vowelizing and what have you, and he has to invent an explanation that sounds convincing enough.
Mm-hmm.
But the point is, your graph taken from Jeffrey, I don't want to micro-criticize it, but the point is well taken. So the question that you have to ask yourself, where do these loan words come from if you're in Mecca? So how many people spoke? So Syriac and Aramaic are basically the same language too, I should note. And everything that's Hebrew came to Arabic probably through Aramaic. The best example is, for example, the fasting in the 5 pillars, Psalm, because, if it was from Aramaic, it would have to be Taum. And what one has to remember is that the Peshitta was a Bible translation translated in Syriac, so a Christian dialect of Eastern Aramaic. But it was translated probably by a group of Jews that converted to Christianity, and they translated it directly from the Hebrew. And technical terms they didn't translate. So Hajj, the pilgrimage, is the best example. Because in Judaism, in Hebrew, these are for the pilgrimage festivals going to Jerusalem. So Passover and Sukkot and what's the other one? I forget. But,
Something I'd love to speak about in the future. It's been a while since I wrote the notes, and I need to refresh myself. So I could speak in error, but somewhere in the 7th century, 6th-ish century, because I've spoken with Odon and the guys about this. Somewhere around Kufa, there were these schools where they were vowelizing the Arabic script, but at the same time, there was a whole process where the Hebrew was also being where the Masoretic text was being edited. So you had the vowelization and the pronunciation added to the Hebrew. It was a parallel project.
I wouldn't say it was probably in Syria somewhere, in Damascus or Aleppo. So this is what is interesting. Your point is well taken. So the point is this starts with the Masoretes. No.
But you have the Kerrites also heavily involved, and they were also translating everything from Hebrew into Arabic using Arabic script. So there's influences there as well, which one needs to look at more closely.
Yes, but the point is that, for example, if you look at the Jewish Masoretes, so the point being that Hebrew had ceased to be a living language. If you read the Mishnah already, you have this passage in the Mishnah where they're debating the meaning of the Hebrew word, because they're speaking Aramaic largely, and even though the Mishnah is written in Hebrew, but it's scientific language, Latin, and like Latin became. And then they're debating the meaning of a Hebrew word, and then they say, well, get your cleaning lady in. She's from Galilee. And that was in the 3rd century, the only place where they still spoke Hebrew, apparently. So the Masoretes were canonizing the liturgical pronunciation of Hebrew, and then the Syriac Church also started doing the same thing with the Peshitta, and you have 2 different vocalization systems, the Eastern and the Western tradition in Syriac. But it's also the idea that the consonantal text can't be touched, but you can add vowels and diacritics underneath or on top of the letters or in the letters, like the Dagesh in Hebrew. And you then see the Arabs at some stage, or the people with the Quran, let us say, jump on board at some stage. And you are right, there is a certain interaction, because if you look at the fatha, the A in Arabic, the dash on top of a letter, well, it's a closed A vowel, and in Hebrew, it's a stroke, it's a dash underneath a letter, and it's called the patah. And in Aramaic, if I remember, in Syriac, if I remember correctly, it's called the patucha, putuchu, patucha, something. How depending how you pronounce Syriac, but patacha, basically originally, it's the same. It's the same vowel. So they basically it's called the same thing to designate the same thing. And there is a theory going back to the German Paulkala, Masoreten des Westens, the Masoretes of the West. And where he points out, so if you look at the transcription of Hebrew in, for example, St. Jerome and other places, you see that the gutturals and the laryngals were no longer pronounced in Hebrew. So if you look at St. Jerome and the Hexapla of Oregon, and all of a sudden in Masoretic Hebrew, you've got the chet and what have you is pronounced, but then you have the patach furtivum, which is an unaccented epenthetic vowel, and the idea of Paulkala was it's written not underneath the letter, but to a bit of the right of the letter. For example, spirit, ruach. So it's ruach. The accent is on the U, and it's just a short A, and the A is written to the right of the chet, not straight underneath it. And the idea is this is a reminder to pronounce the chet, because they were no longer used to doing that. And there, so you see the influence of Arabic. So yeah, you are right. They are all doing the same thing together. And I think
and this was under the Abbasid control, but it's just that just one slide from a whole series I did, and I'm not as knowledgeable of the topic as you are, hence I rely on the slides and different papers. But there are many papers talking about the Mutazilite influence on the Karaites. And the Karaites, with their affinity, shall we say, with Islam. In fact, some people called them Islamic Jews, right? They were called Islamic Jews, and they emancipated themselves from the rabbinic tradition, and they interpreted the Bible using new methods influenced by Islam. But that tradition, that influence rather, didn't seem to go just in one direction. So there was a lot more cross-pollination. So Islam and the Quran didn't develop in isolation. Clearly, there was some kind of copying going on.
I concur. So the problem is that our designations of Christianity, Judaism, and Islam, this is, we're talking 1,500 years later, let us say, roughly among friends, that these distinctions weren't always clear, as clear-cut as they would seem. So even if you take, for example, the little pharmacy of Epiphanius of Salamis, the Panarion, when he talks about heresies, well, he's being, very Aristotelian with his categories, how he arranges them. But whether there was actually a lot of these heresies, whether they actually existed, as an official movement, I kind of doubt. There were tendencies, when you go to this area, they had problems with the divinity of Christ. When you went to this area, Christ tended to be viewed only as a god and not as a man. And, there were general tendencies.
If these people were nominalists and followed a Gnostic epistemology, then of course they would be highly subjective, but they would still follow within the tradition that was common to their practice or their area or their teaching.
Well, yeah, and with Gnosticism, you have to distinguish between what you have in Egypt and what you have in Mesopotamia. And of course, because the Sassanids closed down the Mesopotamian temples, and a lot of these priests sort of became itinerant. Yeah, you shouldn't use the word syncretistic anymore, but I'm not using it in a scientific sense, just in a descriptive sense.
Yeah.
Of multiple traditions. But what you see, for example, so if you take Sacha Gaon's Arabic translation of the Bible in the 9th or 10th century, so he translates the Hebrew Bible, the Jewish Bible, the Old Testament into Arabic, because of course most of the Jews speak Arabic. But for example, in the Joseph story, in his translation, is clearly influenced by Surat Yusuf in the Quran. And these guys are reading each other's works, So you have rabbinic Jews are reading Karaite and Christian commentaries on the books of the Old Testament, the Hebrew Bible, and Christians are reading them. So there is a lot of cross-pollination going on. So our clear-cut distinctions are a little bit anachronistic, I would say. But with the Karaites, you have this amusing story. So you all know about the Dead Sea Scrolls.
Except maybe Odon,
Yeah, no,
Odon. I'm
Odon.
not sure about Odon. I'm not sure about that guy. But Odon does say we're a great team except for me, so I guess it's.
Well, never trust the French, But I won't get involved in your domestic disputes. Odon is one of the few rugby players that are bigger than me. So, and I have to go to Paris again, and he waits for me at the Gare du Nord with his friends, and but anyway, and the British Expeditionary Force doesn't come, so I have to be nice to Odon, but
right.
Yeah, but anyway. So the story of the finding of that a sheep got lost in a cave and they threw a rock in and they heard something break. But there's a story from, I think it's the 6th century, where basically something similar happens, and they bring scrolls to the Patriarch of Jerusalem, and he's not, Hebrew scrolls, he's not particularly interested in them. So he passes them on to the Jews. And what is interesting, if you look at this famous Cairo Geniza, a discovery of the 19th century, the Geniza where you put text you use anymore. If you look at what was found there, certain texts in Sirah and Hebrew, the Damascus document, among other things. So we knew about them from the Cairo Geniza before the Qumran scrolls were discovered. And what is interesting, when you look at the versions that were found in the Cairo Geniza, so they were copied clearly by somebody who spoke Arabic, and one of the differences between Arabic and Hebrew, morphophonetically, is wa and ya. So yald wald is a son in Arabic, and yalad in Hebrew. So the Hebrew avoids the wa at the beginning of words usually and becomes a ya. It's a well-established sound change in Semitic. But so he's a bit unsure, but he's also unsure because he's clearly copying from a Qumran document. Because you all know the part in the New Testament where Jesus says, if you change one iota of the scripture, of course, yot in Hebrew is the smallest letter, but except when you look at the Qumran Ductus of Hebrew, there it looks very much like a wa, a W. And so this guy, he's Arabic, his Hebrew isn't that great, but but he's clearly more in biblical Hebrew than in post-biblical Hebrew. And he's copying this, and he can't always distinguish between, for example, between the wa and the ya. So, and this was found in the Karaite synagogue in Cairo. So there's one theory that part of the Karaite the origins of the Karaites could have been due to a find of some Qumran text in the 5th or 6th century. But that's just a thought. So the Kerrites, that's complicated, but yes, they certainly do have a. But then with Kerrites, we also have to distinguish between the Kerrites in the Byzantine Empire and the Kerrites in Palestine and what have you. It's not a unanimous, a uniform group, but yeah, good. Their origins are a bit murky, and it of course depends who you ask. If you ask a Kerrite, that's the real Judaism that goes all the way back to Moses, and everybody else got it wrong. But I suppose that's the nice thing about heresy. You're always right, and everybody else is a heretic.
May I ask on the topic of still this cross-pollination between different cultures? I mean, we see things in the Quran, such as it tells one of the stories of Moses, I think it's in Surah 28, that it says when his 2 terms had elapsed, then he's on his way back with his wives, which is actually not his story, it's the story of Jacob. So with that cross-pollination of cultures, they would have known that the book was basically just stories and told quite poorly. Do you know how the transition would have gone from one text that is just a collection of stories into, okay, this is now divine and it's telling the real stories as they happened? Do you have any thoughts as to how they went from A to B?
Well, of course there is. Well, what I'm saying is that by the 9th or 10th century, so for Christians and Jews probably earlier, Origenus was condemned for being too Jewish in his exegesis. But the point is that with the origins of the Quran, we don't know a lot. It's an unknown mystery. Your point is well raised. So, for example, that if you take in Surah 18, the famous Dhu al-Qarnayn, the 2-horned one, which is usually seen as Alexander the Great. But if you look at Moses, one second, Saint Peter in chains. Let's see. Yeah, if you look there, Lloyd, Moses, Saint Peter in chains. If I could trouble you to look that up.
Moses, Saint Peter in chains.
Yeah, it's the church, San Pietro in Vincoli.
Yeah, it's up. Got it.
It's by Michelangelo, a famous sculpture.
Wow.
And if you put that up,
you find a better copy.
Yeah, and there you see Moses in chains. So if you look at where's my Bible? Do I have an English Bible here? No, I only have a French Bible. But if you look in I'll look it up online, Exodus 34, I believe. And Exodus 34, one second. It is, I need it. I don't need the Jehovah Witnesses translation. Voila.
KJV or?
Yeah, no, one second. I don't want Bible study questions. Just give me the Bible, man. Oh yeah. And Moses 29, and when Moses came down from Mount Sinai with the 2 tablets of testimony in his hands, he was unaware that his face had become radiant from speaking to the Lord. Mm-hmm. That is, I don't know which Bible translation that is in English.
NIV. This one is NIV.
But,
yeah.
Is that NIV?
Yeah, this is NIV. It's just the default that came up.
Okay, what does it say in the NIV?
When Moses came down from Mount Sinai with the 2 tablets of the covenant law in his hands, he was not aware that his face was radiant because he had spoken with the Lord. So basically the same as yours.
What verse is that? My Bible is going
29.
all over the place.
29.
29. Okay, now let us then go to the Hebrew. With 2 tablets of the covenant in his hands. Now, well,
Do
one
we
second.
have Orthodox Jewish Bible? Is this going to be the Hebrew? No, I have no idea.
Yeah, that's fine. It's Vayehi.
No, but this is English. We don't find a Hebrew.
No, if you go to Sepharia, you'll find it.
Or Bible Hub.
Sure. Come on, Sepharia.org. What the heck? Come on. My typing is terrible. Let me just fix this. Sepharia.org. And I want to go to
Tanakh, top left. No, top left of the thing here.
Just do it here. Okay, Tanakh, yeah, fine.
And then Exodus on the right, and then 34.
Again, okay.
29. Good. And then it says in Hebrew, Vayehi beredet Moshe mehar Sinai ushne luchot ha'edut beyad Moshe. He's got the tablets of stone. Birdeto min hahar u'Moshe lo yada ki karan or panav bidavro ito. So he didn't, what it says there literally, he didn't know he had horns on his head.
Oh, wow.
And if you then go to Exodus 34:29 in the Vulgate, the Latin.
Where do I find the Vulgate? Let's see.
Yeah, it's the only real Bible translation. But comque decenderet Moises de monte Sinai tenebat duas tabulas testimonii et ignorabat quod cornute esset facies sua ex consortio sermonis domini. He was horned, quod cornuta esset, that he was horned. This is where Michelangelo gets it from. So the point is the dual carnine. So if you look at Bible translators, and especially biblical lexicographers, this is also cross-pollination at its best. So you had a very brilliant German Lutheran Hebraist in the 19th century, Gesenius. He was brilliant, but even Homer sleeps sometimes. And he didn't like the idea of having horns. So he found in pre-Islamic Arabic poetry, and it's also used one time in Haggai, I think, karan is used as a verb to indicate the first sliver of the sun at sunrise. It looks like a horn, the first
so
sun.
Dual carnane doesn't necessarily come from the Alexander Romance. Maybe portions of it are borrowed from the Alexander Romance.
But you could make the argument. You could make the argument here that it's still referring to Moses. It doesn't need to be.
That is crazy.
But this is then going to JC's question. So something went different in transmission, but then you could ask yourself how this is revelation, because if you look at Surat al-Kahf, the Surat of the cave, which is of course the legend of the 7 sleepers of Ephesus. Well, why would that need to become a revelation? Because it was a folk tale that was well known.
There are dozens of those. Paul, you're sitting there so quietly. Do you have any thoughts you want to add?
Yeah, I've got a few questions, but actually, on the dual carnane point, I have a thesis on this, that the Quran author, well, go back a little bit, that Heraclius had, borrowing from Stephen Shoemaker's book, The Apocalypse of Empire, that Heraclius had presented himself as the last emperor. He thought his defeat of the Sasanians was the beginning of the Golden Age and the defeat of Gog and Magog and so on. And he had produced this work, the glorious deeds of Alexander, to basically big up himself, as put himself in the role of the last great emperor. And
the thesis originally comes from Reining, who did a lot of work on the Alexander romance, and it's basically a hybrid of Daniel and Gilgamesh epos, and so it is imperial propaganda. I concur.
And
so
the Daniel point, of course, very good, because because Alexander the Great appears in the book of Daniel as a ram with the two horns, butting away the Medes and so on. So this idea of Alexander having two horns was already there back in the Hebrew Bible.
It was already there, but the point is, if you look at Mesopotamia, and this is where you see where the problem. So if you type in the Lloyd, the Naram-Sin stela, Naram-Sin, Naramsin, Naram-Sin stela. Voila.
Naram-Sin stela. There we go. Picture, just a photo.
Picture is good. It's in the Louvre in Paris. So yeah, that's a good one. Yeah, I could make it big. Yeah. So what's interesting is you see that most of what people says about Western art is incorrect. Because if you look at the depth and the perspective, because everybody is looking up. So if you draw lines from all of the eyes and you go to the top of the stela, go higher, they're all looking to the two images of the gods. And but that's beside the point. But the guy there on the left, the bloke there, that's Naram-Sin, the grandson of Sargon. So we're the first Semitic empire in Mesopotamia, let's say roughly 2200 BC, 2300 BC. Mesopotamian dating is a bit, but sometime in the middle of the second half of the third millennium. So he's got a woolen hat on, which is the symbol of royalty. He's a king. They wear woolen hats, and maybe that's why woolen hats are back popular today with hipsters. But but he's also wearing he's got two horns sticking out, as you see, and this is the apotheosis, and this is, of course, why everybody doesn't like to translate Moses as having horns, because it implies that he somehow became a divine in which would sort of defeat the purpose of monotheism, I suppose. But don't quote me. But the Sargonic, which is the first Semitic empire they replaced the Sumerians for a while. They made this huge empire into Syria and elsewhere. But these were the first kings. So when you write uniform, that's the writing you see on the right. But you also use categories. So if a person's name, they'll use the sign Lutu, which means it's a man, and if it's a god, they'll use the sign Dingir to indicate it's a god. And Akkadian kings were divinized, and they became gods, and the horns are the symbol of their divinity. And this is, of course, what Alexander was hot on.
But this goes back again. You can go to the Yemenites, you can go to the Sabaeans. They have similar iconography, the idea of the horns. Of
course, but where did the Yemenites get it from? So if you look at recent,
from the Babylonians, came from that
from
part of the
Sumerians.
world. Yeah,
because one thing is, so if you look at the recent archaeology of Oman and the Emirates, they've been finding a lot of Mesopotamian temples from the third millennium. And of course, this makes perfect sense because Mesopotamia is good for farming and for sheep.
Yeah.
But they don't have any stone, which they need to import. And they don't have any metal, which they need to import. And they don't have any wood. So one of the first episodes, so before the Gilgamesh epic became an epic, it were in the Sumerian tradition, it was short stories. And then a Babylonian scribe much later turned it into a 12-tablet epic. But the first thing is that he goes up north to get cedar. He goes conquering with his buddy to get cedar trees because they need it. So of course in Yemen and in the Emirates, sort of on the rim of Arabia there in the south, and we know in the third millennium, already at the beginning of the third millennium, Sumeria was trading with the Indus civilization in India. The Harappans, Mohenjo-Daro, the Harappan civilization. So what I mean, it's all connected. Let's just keep it that way.
Even the religion of Yemen.
If I could just scroll back and complete my thought on this. So Heraclius is using the story of Alexander for imperial propaganda, the people who imprisoned Gog and Magog, who in this version of the Sasanians, and by his defeating the Sasanians, that makes him the last great emperor. Muhammad, who by the way, also I think sees himself somewhat as an Alexander kind of figure because of Safa and Marwa, and the word Safa particularly has this association through Josephus with the surrender of Jerusalem to Alexander by his high priest, which is pretty much what Muhammad probably wanted to happen in his case. But the Muhammad wants, or the Quranic author wants to tap in the story of Dhul Qarnayn. He wants to tap in to this imperial propaganda that is out there, but he doesn't want to name Alexander because Alexander is a pagan and is not a biblical character, and he doesn't really like this. So he tells the story, but he implies that it's Moses. He uses this ambiguous phrase, the two-horned one, which fits Alexander, but it's quite clever. Also conjures up the idea that it might be Moses because Moses is depicted in art and so on with two horns. But of course,
but in Christian tradition in late antiquity, that Alexander was sort of made retroactively a Christian kind of. So because the empire of Alexander was considered the ideal state.
Yeah, I'm not sure that the Quran.
No, I'm not talking about the Quran, but
might have bought into that. They might. The guy was quite old school, I think, in some ways.
No, but the point, the important point, I suppose, to maintain here, you are correct with the Alexander legend, and this is inspired by the Quran. But then this poses. Oh no, the Quran was inspired by the Alexander legend. Sorry, I would have to formulate more clearly. My apologies. The point I just want to try to make: if the Quran came from Mecca and Medina, who would have understood this analogy? So the point is, the Quran is a product of the periphery of Hellenistic Syria, the Roman. It's clearly a product of the Roman Empire, and this is what you see with all of the Christian descriptions of Islam, from the 9th, 10th century onwards. They all call it a heresy. They don't see it as a new religion. But this poses another problem for Mecca and Medina, because if Islam originated there, why would it be seen as a heresy? Because you can only have heresy inside the Roman Empire. Look at the Nestorians. After the Council of Nicaea, they quit Dodge, they crossed the Euphrates, and they have this great career spanning centuries all the way to China. And there's nobody to bother them, because you only have orthodoxy inside the Roman Empire, imperial orthodoxy. So it would not have been, if it had been in Mecca and Medina, it would have just been I think, as our friend Gallet would say, a post-Christian spin-off, and have gone its own way. and how would it have gained traction? So it's clearly a product of Syria, which had been part of the Alexander's empire and part of the Roman Empire. It was thoroughly Hellenized. And this is what we see. And of course, one of the side effects of imperial disintegration is you start writing vernaculars. So one of the side effects of empire is you gain your own identity. So if you look at all of this post-colonial nonsense that we now have, that we have these countries where they see themselves as Canadians, let us say, but it doesn't really have all that much of a history, or Ghanaians or Nigerians. These were multiple kingdoms at some stage, but they'd been administrative districts which become countries. With Lloyd, South Africa might be a case in point, where you had a Zulu kingdom, you had 2 Boer republics, you had a British part, you had people that belonged to nothing, and a lot of people that moved in and out at various stages. But now you've got this idea that we're South African, which is a product of the, for better or worse, of the British. I would say for the better, but anyway, that's my personal opinion. But
yeah, we're a product of a territory, I guess, but then there's so many divisions, or shall we say distinctions for now, within the country as well.
But the point here being that that this area was thoroughly Hellenized, and if you see the contents of the Quran and the biblical allusions, as I said, the 7 sleepers and all of the other stories that have crept in, it's clearly a product of a literate people. I mean, these are theologians at work here. This is not an illiterate spediteur, a caravan dude, musing on God in his spare time and talking with Gabriel. And if you want to understand the classical Islamic story of how the Quran was revealed, just read Daniel 9, where Daniel talks with Gabriel, and you find all of the essential components there. And also you find there that in most of the Bible translations, it's that for thou art greatly beloved. If you look in the Hebrew, it's Ish Kamudot. So basically saying, because you are a Muhammad. So the root Hamada, Muhammad, where Muhammad is derived from, is clearly Hebrew in origin. It's not an Arabic term.
That's a very interesting point about Daniel 9. I wasn't aware of. There's a heresy called...
You knew about it, Lloyd.
Maybe I did. I can't remember everything, but have you heard of the Altricites or the Alkasites or the Halkasite? Because we spoke about it on the channel. There was a group from Iran, effectively today. Alkasai was a man who was visited by an angel and given a book. Sound familiar? So he was given an angel, and there's so many parallels with the story of Alkasai, how he was given a book and sent off as a messenger, and the nature of the angel and the message and so on, and some of the practices and what Muhammad did. There is such a parallel. They're not identical, of course, but there are incredible parallels there. So, and these guys were basically an offshoot. They were basically heretical Jews, but like seriously Gnostic, heretical. What's the other thing? Not Gnosticism, Hermetic. They were sort of Hermetic, Gnostic, Kabbalistic, Jewish heretics. But their parallels with Islam in many ways is very interesting, and they borrowed heavily from the Hebrew text. So that's interesting.
Oh, yeah, it's interesting. And of course, I mean, this is, talking with angels and getting stuff revealed by angels. Of course, this is a great
way to give yourself authority, or to give yourself credibility.
For example, if you put up Haggai 2:6-7 briefly.
Okay, give me a second. Let me go find that.
First of all, with the English translation.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. What the heck? Haggai 2:6. Here we go.
Yeah, okay, that's good. Okay, then go to the next verse. I
Here we
was
go.
okay, 2:6 to 7. This is what the Lord Almighty says: in a little while I will once more shake the heavens and the earth and sea. I will shake the nations, and what is desired by all nations will come, and I will fill this house with glory, says the Almighty. So this is usually taken by most modern interpreters to mean that the Temple of Ezra wasn't quite as magnificent as the Temple of Solomon, but one day it'll be pretty cool. So if you then go to the Hebrew,
I need to go to
No,
Safari again.
Okay, yeah.
I use Bible Hub.
Okay,
Bible
so
Hub is-
where do I go? For Haggai, let me
Tanakh again.
Tanakh again.
And then go down. You go down because it's the latter prophets.
Haggai.
So, yeah,
2
2
and 7.
2 and
2 6s here.
yeah. And good. And so then you see where you have in 1 second. I'm doing something wrong here.
My wife tells me that a lot.
Hamdat, it's just above things. The precious things. It's the word Hamdat here.
Yeah, the Chemdat Hagoyim.
Hamdat, Agoyim. Above,
Yeah.
above things.
V'hirashti et kol hagoyim uva'u chemdat kol hagoyim. So this chemdat is, of course, the same root as Muhammad. And what is the? How do they translate it in your translation? Where are you?
The precious
what is
things.
the precious things. So now go to the Vulgate again of Haggai 2:7.
Jeez, my typing is terrible.
Okay, yeah, that's good. 2:7. Quae hec dici Dominus exertuum ad hoc unum modicum est, et ergo commovebo celum et terram et it's 8 here. Et movebo omnes gentes et veniet desideratus cunctis gentibus. Gentibus. Of course. So if you look at Latin, you have in English desideratum. That's a desired thing.
Yeah.
In Latin, a desideratus is a desired male person. A desiderata would somebody who, I don't want to upset the transgender listeners, but Odon has warned me to be inclusive. But so the point here is the understanding of Saint Jerome, which is based on Jewish exegesis, because you also find this in the Talmud. If where Rabbi Akiva sees Bar Kokhba as the Messiah, and he uses this passage to prove it. So here we see the root of we see the same root as Muhammad, which is in Hebrew, and we have the Chemdat Kol Hagoyim. So it's the desired one, not the desired thing of all the nations. And as I said, Daniel 9, this works also with Daniel 9, this works pretty good. But here we already have something, the precursor to Muhammad already in the Tanakh, in the Christian Old Testament.
So this has strong echoes of what Muslims like to do. The whole term "altogether lovely," like Zakir Naik used to want to do, which is supposedly Muhammad. So that's the idea of Song of Songs 5:16. He's altogether lovely. This is my beloved.
Yeah, but the point is, I wrote a long article on that. Odon also has it.
It's not an article. It's a whole novel.
It's a whole novel. I wrote a biography of Muhammad before Muhammad. Yeah, it's a whole novel. Yeah. You can get it from Odon. He'll pass it on. So the problem is with what one has to do, and this is where Muslims go wrong, is that one has to look at things in context. So philology is the art of context and understanding things in their proper context. And what one has to ask oneself is, so first of all, why is the Songs of Songs in the Hebrew Bible? You know, modern exegetes say, yeah, you know, people like to have fun and a little bit of romance, you know, it lightens heavy prophecy about sin and the end of the world, so you can have a bit of fun on the side. But romantic love poems somehow included in the Tanakh. But you see, there is, of course, this idea that the rabbis supposedly had a council of Yavne sometime in the 2nd century, where they decided on the canon of the Jewish Bible, the Hebrew Bible, our Old Testament, which is total nonsense. It's
Yeah.
what
I think
they
that theory is fallen into disrepute anyway.
Yeah, but what they discussed there was the status of the Song of Songs. And as Gershom Scholem has pointed out long ago, the idea was, after the Christians decided that Jesus was the Messiah prophesied by the Old Testament, and let's say proto-rabbinic Judaism tended to be lesser and lesser messianic, they didn't really need it. But if you look at the exegesis of the Song of Songs, for example, if you look at Song of Songs 8 on Sepharia, if you would.
Song of Songs 8.
Yeah, 1 second. I have to look it up here in my book.
I mean, we've done an analysis of the Masoretic, and it's clear that they removed or altered various verses to remove mentions of the divinity of Christ.
I'm not going to go down that path right now. That's a bit out of our scope here for today. But
yeah, sure.
It's a complicated subject. But if you let me just find it.
Song of Songs.
Give me a second. So you go to Song of Songs, and 1 second.
5.
Which
Pardon?
one?
Pardon?
5.
5.
Or 5-6, something like this.
Okay, let's bring it up.
1 second here.
5 or 5-6. Here we are.
1 second. Let me just.
Darn it.
I'm trying to get my computer to cooperate here. I think I have it. Okay. Argument. 1 second. Yeah. So if you go to Song of Songs, chapter 7, verse 4 in the Hebrew, or whatever it is here, 7:4.
Yep.
Okay. Good. Everybody can read it. I don't know whether YouTube will censor us for being dirty old men. So if you then click on 4. Yeah, no, but okay, we'll let Odon read it. He's a Frenchman. He's into that type of stuff. He's got a reputation to lose. No, but click on 4, if you would, sir.
4.
No, 4.
Your breasts are like 2 fawns, twins of a gazelle.
Yeah, no, on the number 4. Okay, there. Good,
On the
you're
number-
good. And then go on the right, down below Targum. So 1 second. What we have here is Shnei Shadei Kishnei Ofarim Toomi Sevilla, I think, yeah, like twins of a gazelle. So click on All Targum or Aramaic Targum Song of Songs. Your 2 redeemers are destined to redeem you. Messiah, the son of David, Messiah, the son of Ephraim, are like Moses and Aaron, sons of Jochebed, who resembles 2 fawns, twins of a roe. So to oversimplify things, Song of Songs was included in the Jewish canon because it was messianic, and when Judaism stopped being messianic, they didn't need it anymore. And because the Christians had their Messiah, and if you look at Christian exegesis, so one of the earliest commentaries we have of the Hebrew Bible in the Christian tradition is Origen's tradition, Origen's commentary of the Song of Songs, or what's left of it. And there he's clearly using Jewish exegesis, but this is this whole idea of Christ as the groom and the church as the bride of Christ. And this is the tradition we see here. So if you click open below, I'm trying to read it. Terrain Farikecha.
Should I zoom?
Pardon?
Zoom in?
But anyway, you see at the end, Mashiach bar David u Mashiach bar Ephraim. They're talking about the 2 messiahs there. And what's interesting is you've got the Farikaich, which is, of course, we know this from the Surat al-Furqan. So Faraka in Aramaic means to save. So if you go to, well, I'll get there in a second, but what I'm saying here is here we have the Messiah in the Jewish tradition as well. And but so the point is, if you look at Christian exegesis of the Song of the Songs, especially Song of Songs chapter 5, it's very messianic. It's very messianic. The exegesis is very messianic. And this is what Islam, or what these Muslim apologists fail to do. They fail to read the Targums. And there is a Jewish mystical work, what's it called? The Shiur Akuma or something like that.
The Shur Kama, yes. The Shur Kama.
Yes, which is a messianic exegesis of Song of Songs 5. So if you were a Muslim apologist, you would first of all have to explain why Muhammad is just a prophet and not a Messiah, if this is going to work. So if Song of Songs 5:16 is a reference to Muhammad, okay, you have to then explain why it's a plural in Song of Songs 5:16. So if you just go to Song of Songs 5:16.
Let me go, Song of Songs. Give me one moment.
And in Hebrew grammar, it's called the plural of intensification or something.
Yeah, Mal has covered that in the past.
It's a plural, yeah.
Here we go.
Yeah, so 5:16. Yeah. Hiko mamtakim ukulo mahmadim ze dodi veze re'i benot Yerushalayim. So what she's basically saying, hey, this dude is totally cute, but he's all mine. So girls scoot. the point here is it's the plural of intensifications, but if you're going to be an Islamic apologist, you would then have to explain if this is a reference to Muhammad. Well, it's a reference to Muhammad's actually then, and that would be, I suppose, an insurmountable difficulty.
Yeah, because of the plural.
The plural, yeah, it's Mahmadim. And then you would also have to explain how you get from Mahmad to Muhammad.
Yeah.
But it's clear that Mahmad was the original form of Muhammad, and it was Arabicized, because this is what we find in early in Coptic and the earliest Coptic references and Greek reference. But also, if you look at Latin, the Latin transcriptions, which are pretty early, Mahometos, that's where you get Mahomet in French from. How do you go from Muhammad to Mahometos? From Mahmad through Vulgar Latin, you can get there, post-classical Latin. But then you also have to ask yourself, in Turkish, you've got Muhammad, but in Ottoman, the traditional form is Mehmet.
Yeah.
There's no way with Turkish phonology you can go from Muhammad and end up with Mehmet.
Besides the words, you speak of the shirkama, which is the measurements of the body, which is sort of the measurements that the Jews, Rabbinic Jews, were trying to apply to the size of God, which made him 96 miles tall and so on.
When
but the exact same idea was present with the Al-Chasai, who spoke of an angel whose head scraped the universe, scraped the sky, and whose feet straddled the entire horizon. And then, of course, when you see where Aisha speaks in the Hadith of how Muhammad saw Gabriel in his true form, then Gabriel is of the same dimensions. He's massive. He touches, his head touches the sky, exactly like the Jews had it. Yeah. And then the Al-Chasai had it, and then Muhammad has it. So that's, an interesting parallel there.
Well, of course, what I mean is that these hadiths, if, somebody should start doing source critical analysis of hadiths, because this is a great example. But then we run into the same problem. How would anybody know about this work in Mecca or Medina in Hebrew and in Hebrew? Yeah. So, like how many, what did they do? Did the Jews, so the Jews of the Hijaz, they only exist in the Islamic tradition, of course. So I'm not convinced they're historical.
So what do you make of Waraka bin Nawfal, Ibn Nawfal in Mecca? A Jew who converted to Nazarenism, who knew about the Hebrew scriptures,
but the story is of course later, and it's of course the famous topos, because this is you get somebody from another religion to confirm that your guy is the real guy.
Yeah, but the name of the guy, Ibn Nawfal. Nawfal, I think it means a folio or a page, a leaf in a book. It's a sort of fictional character that says something about a Jewish influence, nonetheless. But I was thinking also when you were talking about Mahometos and Mehmet.
You also have this in the Sirah. When Muhammad is born, the Jews of Medina see a star, and they know Muhammad is born in Mecca. Like, give me a break.
Like the Magis. I was just thinking about the fact that John of Damascus, he talks about Muhammad, but he wrote in Greek Mamed, not Ma'amed or Mohammed, but only Mamed. He could have written Ma'amed. If you look at the name of Muawiyah, for example, the Gadara inscription that you know very well.
Yeah, but the question
Ma'awiyah.
But Ma'awiyah, yes. So you could, if you want to do that, Lloyd, you can look up the Greek inscription of Muawiyah. You'll probably get to Islamic awareness. The Greek inscription, the Khamdat.
Gadara, type for Gadara.
Gadara inscription Muawiyah. That's interesting. Because this also undermines a basic tenet of the Islamic tradition, I think, as Odon might know.
Gadara inscription, Muawiyah. So here it is.
Yeah, this
Voila.
one.
Yeah, very good. So that's good. That works fine. Just call it up. Give it to as big as it gets.
Especially the first
I
line.
can find a better copy.
Okay, so first of all, what does the inscription start with?
A cross.
The cross.
Christian
So
cross.
that's a Christian cross. And so this that should tell us something about the last time I looked, but who am I to say anything? But the cross isn't really a Islamic symbol, but I might be wrong. You can correct me. Good. So where are we? So we have the inscription here, and then we have Epi Abdullah. So Abdullah, the servant of God, which is of course a reference to Isaiah, the Eved Yahweh, the Eved Adonai. And it's a Christian name, of course, in pre-Islamic Arabic. And then what Odon was referring to, this is Ma'aviyah. So they don't write the Ain, and he's not called Mu'awiyah as in Arabic, but this is also what we find in the Jewish tradition. He's also called Ma'aviyah. And then we find he's called the Amira al-Mu'minin, so the commander of the faithful. But of course, the question is, the commander of which faithful? So, al-Mu'minin, and then we have Apeluthe Kai Aneothe. So basically, it was preserved and renewed. O Klibanos Ton Etauthia. So the sauna of the residents here, Dia by Abdullah Huiyu Abu Asemu, by Abdullah, the son of Abu Hasim, the Sumbulu, the counselor, and Mene de Cambrio in the month of December. Gente emera deutera indictiones. So it's on the December the 5th, on the second day of the 6th year of the indiction. The indiction years were the Byzantine taxation system. So every 7 years they reassessed the value of properties. And it was, so he's clearly, Muawiyah is within the Byzantine Empire still to some extent. He's using the indiction years. And then we find Etus tes colonias, and then 726. So in the year of the colony, 726, so that's the annus provinciae of the Romans. So when the region became first this province. And then he says, Kata Arabas Etus 42, Ais Iasen ton Nosunton Spude Ianu, and then M, which probably stands for Metropolitu Gadarenu. So the final, so he has the indiction years, which are Byzantine, the years of the colony, which is the Annus Anni Provinciae, which is Roman. Then the final dating, or the final thing he mentions, for the healing of the sick, which is why they have a sauna, thanks to the efforts of John, the Metropolitan, so the Bishop of Gadara. Sounds all very Islamic, but the thing here that interests us the most is at the third line from the bottom to the right.
Yeah.
There we've got Kata Arabas. So the inscription comes from 644. he dates it. This is, of course, the Hijri dating, but he calls it according to the Arabs. Why? Because what does the Hijra have to do with the Arabs? It was always the flight of Muhammad
And
from... Go ahead.
no, the prefix mu also means something. It's one who does the thing that follows in the rest of the word. So
Yeah.
Muslim. So Mu'awiya, what does he do? Does Awiya or Avia mean something? That he does that thing?
No. Well, what the etymology is, so the root from Ain Wav Ya, it usually means in Semitic to bewail something. And according to some people, they've proposed that, well, there was a group of monks that, what do you call that in English? Fait le deuil, Odon.
Still it?
No, they mourned the crucified Christ, so they cried. Fait le deuil. But
Criers.
and he could have been. So the question is, it's a serious question. With, if you look at the names of the Umayyad caliphs, are these names or are they titles? Because you could also see it as that his profession. He was somebody who was in mourning of crucified Christ. But anyway, the point is Muawiyah would be a passive participle in Arabic. It can't be that with Ma'awiyah.
Okay.
So whatever his name is, if it's a name or a title, we'll leave that in the middle. The big question is, why does he say in year 42 according to the Arabs?
Yeah.
Oh, hold on.
Because even if you don't know the commander of the faithful of the hot baths, okay, that's basically, this is more eloquently translated. Abu Asemos, Abu Hashim, the counselor, the symbolon, on the 5th month of December, the second day, 6th year of the indiction, in the year 726 of the colony, according to the Arabs, the 42nd year, for healing the sick under the care of
Johannes.
But the metropolitan, it could also be the bishop of, so he says there, the M stands for magistriano, the magister. It could also be the metropolitan, because Johannes is, of course, a rather Christian name, I would dare say. But the point is, why is it year 42 according to the Arabs? Well, if you look, of course, what happened in 622, Heraclius, the war you talked about earlier. So Heraclius in Constantinople is under a lot of pressure. He's being cornered by what's his name? The Shah and Shaheen. What's his name again? Khosrau II. And he has to attack before the Byzantine Empire is wiped off the face of the earth. And he leaves Constantinople on Easter Sunday, and his army is led by a icon of the Holy Mother of God, which self-produced itself, apparently. It is claimed, it is said. I wasn't there, I can't judge it, but I'm just telling what the sources say. And of course, this is the first Byzantine Sassanid war where the Arabs don't play a huge part, because of course the Limitani, the border guards of the Roman Empire on the Euphrates, were the Ghassanids, based largely in Golan. But at the beginning of the end of the 6th and the beginning of the 7th century, they, of course, when a king died, the new king had to be confirmed by the emperor in Constantinople. And then they decided to mix religion and politics. So when the new king arrived, and most of the Arabs here they were monophysites, which had in the meantime become a heresy, And the new kings were said, yeah, before we confirm your kingship, explain to us the Trinity and the nature of Christ. And they didn't get to the second round, and they were usually exiled to Sicily or Cyprus or somewhere. And this happened a couple of times, and then the Rassanids stopped being the border guards, and the same thing happened on the other side of the Euphrates at Al-Hira with the Lachamids, which means in Arabic, it's not the Abu Lacham, the sons of a guy called Lacham. So Lachama in Arabic means to fight, Malchama, and what have you. This is just the militia. But there, the Persians decide, yeah, you guys don't need a king, your own king. I'll send you a Persian governor instead. And they didn't like the idea, so they also decided it wasn't fun anymore. So this was the first war without the involvement of the Arabs. And what did they do? Yeah, good. The big boys are out killing each other. So they used this war to gain independence. So for Muawiyah, 622 is the date when he declares independence, or when he thought the Arabs declared independence. So you have this analogy, I think with the with some former colonies, I think Vietnam with the French, and France is occupied, so let's become independent. And then, so what date did Vietnam become independent? The same thing with Indonesia and the Dutch. They say 1945, the Dutch say 1948, and the French say whatever the Conference of Geneva or wherever it was. But so it's clear here this guy has never heard of Muhammad, and he's never heard of the Hijrah. And what's interesting is that if you look at the papyri and the old dates, because we also have a inscription from Muawiyah from Taif, which is near Mecca, in Arabic, and it's also dated to year 42, but he doesn't say what's being counted. And if you look at the Arabic papyri, they all they say Dhul Qadda, so the year of the judge, Dhul Hijjah, Dhul Hijrah al-Arab. They have all kinds of designations later, but nothing clearly Hijrah. And of course, if you look at the Aramaic texts, they say something similar. They start using the Hijrah dating in the later in the 7th century, and this becomes interesting. They say in the they say the Shana, and then the year, Le Sultana de Tayaye. So in the year of the Arabs, which is the equivalent, Tayaye is an Aramaic word to describe the Arabs, but we also have some Syriac texts like John ben Penkaye on a colophon of a New Testament where he says, in the year 939 of the Greeks, which is year 36, Le Sultana de Mahagraye, the year of the, what you find in Greek, the Mahagire, what they mean is the Hagarites, which, who are the Hagarites? They're the Arabs.
Not the Mujahirun.
Not the
We've
Mujahirun.
already crossed the 2-hour mark, so perhaps we should wrap it up here, because I think we could probably go for the next 6 hours at this point, because there were a whole bunch of things that were said that I wanted to go
my
down
apologies.
that rabbit hole and then go down the other. And I'm sure for all of you, it's the same.
My apologies.
No. There were lots of things you said, and we were all just listening. And there were things you said that, like, this ties in with some other topic, that could be explored and so on. So it's interesting to get your feedback on that, or to throw ideas out.
If you want to do another half hour, we can just do quickly the Nadir if you want. But or if you prefer to stop for now, we can stop for now.
How about we do next Wednesday? Pick it up where we left off and continue. Because this was interesting for an opening session.
Yeah, I hope I didn't bore you too much, but
well, we are inviting you back, and
I take it as a compliment. But with Odon, I'm not sure.
Come on.
Odon has joined us. You know what? I was very nervous, like reaching out to Odon, and I always thought he's gonna shout at me a little bit, and it turns out, he's like a big teddy bear, and actually we've done a whole bunch of shows together, so it's all good.
Okay, but so yeah, Odon. Next Wednesday is Saint Jean Baptiste. It's Saint John of the Baptist Day, which means it's the Fête Nationale du Québec. But we'll do it. I'll go for a drink afterwards.
Okay.
Yeah, so next Wednesday at 7. Yep. And
we
have any rabbit holes.
Yeah.
If you have any rabbit holes, or the viewers have any questions or whatever, pass them on, and I'll do my best to.
Yeah. For the audience, please leave the questions in the comments later. I'm sure all of us have questions, and we were listening. And I think we were just really fascinated, and I mean, we'd love to explore.
If nothing else, it should have become clear today that the Quran. So of course, it makes perfect sense to move later Islam, Muhammad, and the Quran to Mecca, because it's a blank canvas. You can say anything you want, but it should be clear from the tip of the iceberg that we've just discussed today. We can go into more detail. Is that the Quran cannot have come from splendid isolation. There is just too much intertextuality with, as we saw with Mesopotamia, and going back all the way to the beginning of written history, basically, that you can't get this in Mecca and Medina. So wherever the Quran comes from, it's in the, let's say, in the classical sense of the term, the civilized world, from the Greco-Roman Mesopotamian intersection. And because otherwise, none of this would have made sense. If you write a book, somebody has to understand it.
Yeah.
Right. Something we've done here is present ideas, write presentations, present research, and we all discuss them. And I think we all have something to contribute, and we all are converging. The standard narrative is clearly on its last legs, despite its adherents, even on the Christian apologetic side. But I don't think it can hold for much longer, because there's just so much evidence that conspires against the standard narrative. There's just too much historical evidence now, and it's just a matter of assembling it, putting it on the table.
So you have a problem. Like if you look at the Sirat in Arabic, not the translation, because the translations are always highly selective. But if you take out the intertextuality with the Bible, you're left with about, a third of the text. So with both testaments. And so, for example, you have this famous where Muhammad conquers Mecca at the Battle of the Trench. But if you go back to Justinian the Great and his famous general Belisarius, he fights the Battle of Dara, where he defeats the Persians by making a trench. And this we find in Procopius, the Wars of Justinian. So Procopius is the famous biographer, hagiographer of Justinian the Great. He writes a rather interesting account also of the private life of Justinian and Theodora and what they got up to in the palace. But
they've stolen ideas and incorporated those into their stories. We should.
The Battle of Dara is clearly the Vorlage of the Battle of the Trench, and there's no. If you look at the description of Procopius, well, this is the detailed version, and what you find in the Islamic account of the Battle of the Trench is the Reader's Digest version, let us say.
Right. Okay.
But you also have the other problem, well, just to finish quickly, so with the biblical figures, what we talked about at the beginning, what is interesting is that, with the exception of Jonah, but Jonah is an exception because Yunus is clearly borrowed from Greek. It's not from Hebrew or Aramaic, it's clearly from Greek. And of course, in Hebrew, Jonah is transparent, it's the dove. But the point being that all of the biblical figures mentioned in the Quran that are prophets and Rasul, messengers, are not prophets in the biblical tradition. And the biblical prophets are never mentioned. And then we come to the second point. What is a prophet doing in the 7th century? That's an anachronism. And the third problem...
Well, he says also prophecy comes from the Jews, and he claims he's not a Jew, so how is he a prophet?
Yeah, but even in Judaism, there are no prophets at this time, because Malachi is the last of the prophets. And what you find in the rabbinic Jewish tradition is that prophecy is ceased, and if God somehow needs to talk directly to the rabbis, he sends the Bat Kol, the daughter of the voice. It's sort of something similar to the Holy Spirit. Let's not press the analogy. Basically a similar idea, put it that way. So you don't have prophets then, but then the third problem that you would have to answer, so if you try to write a biography of Ezekiel or Isaiah or Jeremiah, let's just keep with the big prophets, how big would your book be?
Thin.
Yeah, there's not a lot of detail.
Yeah, why? Because you read Jeremiah 1:5, because prophets are chosen by God, of course. They're chosen by God they don't need a biography because they're messengers. So you've got two contradicting ideas here with Muhammad. So if he's a prophet, why does he need a biography? Good. First of all, what's a prophet doing in the 7th century? And second of all, why does he need a biography? Because the revelation should be the confirmation that he's a prophet.
Yeah, well, if you read the seerah of the multiples that exist, he effectively becomes Jesus.
Oh, he does.
They give him an entire backstory, but the things will be a whole night discussing all of this. So maybe we should.
But you see this especially in the Shiite tradition, and where Fatima is then that's even in a an old Sunni source. I can't remember where Fatima is called the mother of her father, which is of course a reference to the Theotokos.
Yeah. No, it becomes blatant. I've got examples I can show. It's blatant. He becomes Jesus. I mean, they put him in John 1:1. In the beginning was Muhammad, and the earth was made by Muhammad, for Muhammad, with Muhammad, and the universe is from the fabric of Muhammad. And it's like, what the heck am I reading?
Well, I know a student, and she wrote her doctoral thesis on these posters that you have in used to have in Afghanistan and still have in Pakistan. She wrote a 3-volume thesis, and these are very interesting. So her husband collected these things, and what's interesting is you see that in Pakistan and previously in Afghanistan, they took American and English Sunday school posters and basically adapted the imagery to Muhammad. And what's interesting, because if you see in the Byzantine imagery, Jesus is always like this, 3 and referring to the Trinity. And of course, they changed the imagery so it's Tawheed.
Right.
So this is still what you're saying. It's still going on today, Lloyd.
Yeah, it's an evolving tradition. I think, yeah, there's so much we could explore here. I think there's like probably weeks worth of discussion.
Well,
So guys, should we,
Yeah.
perhaps we should call it a day here, because I have
Very good.
school tomorrow. You know, I've got to brush my teeth, brush my hair. My mom has to dress me, and I've got to run off to school tomorrow.
And
You know.
polish your shoes, yes.
You know how it is. I've got to pack my little lunchbox because some of us still have to go to school. You know, we're not unfortunately YouTube millionaires. So,
Well, yeah, some of us have to teach tomorrow too. So
you know, so no. But guys, last word. Any final thoughts? Just a quick wrap up. But thank you. This has been amazing. Really fun. I mean, really privileged and honored to have you. Thank you,
my pleasure.
guys.
Someone should
Just the
write a
same.
book summarizing all this. And a great title would be The Great Secret of Islam.
How about the greater secret of Islam?
Yeah.
Yeah, from me, thank you, Robert. It's been phenomenal. And yeah, we live in a world where people are used to getting answers very quickly as to what happened with Islam. Oh, yeah, there was this guy who didn't know anything about anything, and then people follow him. But that's not the case. 7th, 8th century, lots of things were happening. So it will be great to reconvene next week and continue conversations to try to make sense of what happened 1400 years ago. But very, very good show. It's been a pleasure as well meeting you for the first time, Professor.
Yeah.
I'm grateful for your invitation. Thank you.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you very much for the talk, Robert. It's been fascinating and very enjoyable. I've got several questions, but I think Lloyd would not permit them. But we could maybe chat.
Bring them
more
on next
week.
time. Let's start with questions next time. So
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. No. Well, yeah. Also, so I can have some dinner. It's late, but
I need some dinner too. Yes.
yeah. But yeah, this was fantastic.
I just got in from this train trip through Germany.
I understand, but the topic is so compelling. So thank you.
My
So
pleasure.
guys, then
Thanks,
we'll
Thanks,
we'll pick this up next week. Thank you very much for offering to come back. So everyone, thank you very much for the time, and God bless, and we will see you all soon.
Take care, you guys. Thank you.
Bye.